On a hiking trail in Peterson Creek National Park, or Nature Park, just south of downtown Kamloops, is a tree that has a plywood board attached to it. Attached to the board is an old yellow plastic telephone. Next to it, a sign says, "The telephone of infinity. This phone is here for everyone who has lost a loved one. It is a tool to guide us through our grief. It explains that those who come to the phone may use it to speak to those who have died. Although your loved one has passed, they are always here to listen," says the note. Underneath these instructions is one final line, dedicated to the memory of Tyler Robinson. Kirsty Sykes, the landscaper who installed the phone, did not come up with the idea by herself. In fact, the first telephone installed for this purpose, called the Telephone of the Wind, was placed on a hilltop in Otsuchi, Japan, in 2011, shortly after the earthquake and tsunami that left so many without loved ones. Mourners lined up by the hundreds to speak into this phone to the ones they lost, telling them both ordinary and meaningful things. Word spread about this project, and other people in other countries began to make their own telephones of the wind, which inspired Sykes to install her own after the death of a beloved friend. In an interview, she said, quote, "You could write your feelings in a journal, but I just think sitting and speaking out loud is important as well. It's a natural gift that we have to use communication that way," end quote. I thought of this story as I prepared this week's sermon because I was thinking about the silence of Lazarus in the gospel passage. Then as I looked at the other readings of the day, I saw that silence was a common color. In the reading from Ezekiel, the valley of bones also must have been silent before the rattling, before the wind, before the return of flesh. In the psalm, the psalmist cries out to and waits for a God who may seem to be silent. And Lazarus is silent, even after returning from death. We never hear his voice or what happened to him from his own perspective. It was his sisters who pray and plead with Jesus on his behalf. And later, it will be Mary who anoints Jesus' feet in gratitude, perhaps with nard she bought to anoint Lazarus' dead body. The experience of death is often punctuated by silence. When we lose someone, the voice we loved only exists in memory, or if we're lucky, on tapes or in videos. Some of my most treasured possessions are audio clips of my dad playing guitar, and now my mom singing. But the silence that comes is not only from the dead. When we try to talk about our pain, often words fail. Likewise, our friends and family may have things to say, but sometimes they're hollow and without meaning. In English, we call these platitudes. In Japanese, arikitari na hyogen. We say these things because we're not sure what else to say. And silence is scary. Maybe we're afraid that adding silence to the already loud silence of a death makes it worse. When the platitudes run out, another kind of silence often begins, the silence of avoidance. People stop talking about the dead or the disabled or anything unpleasant. Grieving people, cancer patients, and folks who develop disabilities often talk about losing friends who can't handle being around them because it's too distressing. It takes courage to face a valley of bones, even when they're not yours. It takes courage to cry out to God from the depths when you're not really sure if God's listening. I think it would take courage for me to approach that telephone to infinity, because if I started to talk into it, I have no idea what I would say, and I don't know if I'd be able to stop. When Martha speaks to Jesus, she tells him that if he had been there, Lazarus would not have died. But then she shows her faith. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. When Mary speaks to Jesus, she can't manage that. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Except we don't know how she says it. If she's angry, sad, frustrated, or faithful. But even though John doesn't tell us how she sounded, we can probably imagine how it sounds, because I think all of us have said something like that at least once, right? Lord, if you had been here, our bones are dried up and our hope is lost. But our beloved dead are silent. We fall silent. Our friends fall silent. The breeze stops, and a hush falls over the valley. Only bones. Silence. Maybe for moments, maybe for hours, maybe for days, weeks, months, years. Silence. But, dear beloved of the Lord, God is not silent. Sometimes it very much seems like God is. God often does not speak to us in the way we would like or in the way that we expect. But God is not silent. When the people we love die, we gather together to mark it, to pray against the silence. And bone returns to bone. God weeps with us. And the spirit which had deserted returns and opens graves, fills us up, and we are able to stand once more. We cry out to God from the depths because we know God has promised to draw us up from deep waters. We know God can because God did it before and will do it again. With God, there is plenteous redemption. We cry out, Lord, if you had been here. And Jesus responds, Lazarus, come out. Sadly, Jesus is not here to perform a sign like this today. But what happens to Lazarus is not really resurrection. He would go on to die again. And in fact, we do not hear the last part of the chapter, which sadly tells us that the religious authorities plot to have him killed because his return to life is so threatening. The worst thing an empire can do to someone is kill them. If death is open to negotiation under the command of Jesus, that's bad news for empire. The Romans had already done horrible things to the Jewish people when they had challenged Rome's authority. The religious leaders knew how dangerous this was. They were afraid for their people. But even when the empire did its very worst, which we'll hear about in just a few more days, silence couldn't win. God is not silent. Lazarus went on to die again, but Jesus didn't. Just as he befriended the sinners around him, so too I like to imagine Jesus befriending death, taking away her sting, swallowing up her terrors in his victory. I like to imagine him greeting her, hashing out a new covenant before the Sabbath, then using that very Sabbath to open the gates of hell and free all those imprisoned there, as some of our ancient church ancestors believed he did on Holy Saturday. I like to imagine him giving her some manner of affectionate glance or touch before returning to the garden and turning the world upside down. Again, breaking silence with one gentle word: Mary. God calls us by name because we belong to God, and to God we shall return. We may fall silent. Our friends and family may fall silent. Our beloved dead may fall silent. But God is not silent.